Good afternoon, everyone. You came back. Thank you so much. This is probably the only church in my life where I really have felt when I have to come back on a Sunday that it's not onerous, it's not work, because I just can't get enough of this place. And I can't get enough of this organ. I'm so excited for it. People sang this morning brilliantly with it. Last night's recital, if you were here, was marvelous, and I still revisit a lot of the moments from it. So it's very exciting to have you all here today, this afternoon. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you haven't been to St. Margaret's Church before, this building has a lavatory in the back, in the narthex, as you walked in, just the door here. And through this door over here on the left side of the church, the right side of the church, rather, there are restrooms on either the upper level or the lower level, should you wish to use them. But I would ask right now that you silence your cell phones or any mobile devices you have, as people might not think that you're in church at 2:30 on a Sunday afternoon. So please silence those as you can. And without further ado, let me introduce to you my favorite music director, Jim Douglas.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Hello to those watching at home. We miss you, but you're here in spirit. Let's see. Well, I guess before we begin, I should, well, first of all, thank you, everyone, for coming today. And for those who were here this morning, who came back, I trust you had a nice lunch and then came right back. Today wouldn't have happened without the generosity and support, and as Peter mentioned in his printed remarks in the program, the love of the people here at St. Margaret's and the friends of St. Margaret's who contributed to the organ campaign last spring. None of this would have been possible without you. I thought we'd begin this afternoon with one sort of like put a bow on the whole project, which, as we talked about this morning, began 3 years ago today with the first organ committee meeting over Zoom. Organ committee members who are here, could you just stand up real quickly? Jim Weekly, Alexandra Butte, Kristen Berthelot. Paul, you count too. Peter, myself, Tom Sheehan, who's consultant, Ted Ruig, and Sarah Westcott, whose families have since moved out of town. I hope they're watching. How are we doing? Thank you for your work at the early stages of the project. As Paul O'Donnell mentioned last night, our sort of, I guess, journey at the beginning of the project was halted due to COVID. But thankfully, we got a lot of work done in the months leading up to the beginning of March, when the whole world kind of shut down. And then from there, things began to happen behind the scenes, and we're where we are today. Let's see. David, will you please stand up real quickly? David Ogletree, who's principal of Marshall and Ogletree. He's partly to blame for this whole thing. So welcome again, David. Who, along with his partner in crime, Doug Marshall, who couldn't be with us today, helms M&O Organ Builders, located in Needham, Massachusetts. Their work in the digital organ building field stands above the rest, with installations throughout the country and more to come, which I'm not allowed to talk about, but they're coming, right? We're fortunate to have Opus 17 call St. Margaret's home. I'm also delighted to introduce John. John, you're here. Can you stand up? John Kemp, who's the mastermind behind the casework. I said it last night, and I meant it. I'm really grateful that you agreed to do it. You know, and you could have said no, given the, you know, you're not local, but it's one of those things where you didn't want to just hire some contractor to put up some cases on the wall. And I knew John was the right person to do it, and I kind of just blubbered, "Can we do this?" And then he made it happen. So it's, again, all his fault that we see these beautiful cases on the wall. And also Paul Shirky, who put together the case and the platform we don't see behind the altar wall. So shout out to Paul for his work. And he had some design inspiration from Patty, I think, and me, and and then actually Ken Hitchcock threw his 2 cents in to come up with the platform behind the wall that holds one division of speakers. So we'll have time between when we wrap up the slideshow and video portion of this. If people feel free to come back and kind of look at behind the scenes and have a look at the console and the casework up close. We'll start the slideshow now. Basically, it's sort of a soup to nuts, beginning to end, divided into portions of sort of the concept of what we thought we could do, from chicken scratch to measured out drawings. What are they called? Sketches, right, John? Sketches, and computer renderings, and actual construction and installation photos of the console, the casework, and everything in between. During the course of the slideshow, I'll pause and I'll allow John to speak to everything he did, and I'll speak to the instrument itself and anything that I forget or I'm still learning about the instrument, David will help me with. And if there's a question or there's something that piques your interest in a video or photo, raise your hand and feel free to ask the question and we'll try to answer it. I'm trying to take advantage of this captive audience to have you learn a little bit about all the craziness that is involved with not only the organ, but this one in particular, all the wonderful things and the flexibility that it offers. After that, we'll take a quick little break. Don't leave. And then we'll start doing some singing, and I'll introduce our guest organists who are playing for that with me. All right, so I'm going to hop down to the computer, and we're going to take a look at some photos. Can everybody hear me? Great. Okay, so these few photos coming up are, well, how would you describe these, David?
These are the architectural renderings.
Okay, so these are the architectural renderings of what we thought the console would be and pretty much what it came out to be with a couple changes along the way. Who's that a picture of, David? Is that me? Is that Peter? Looking for the mute the rector button? Just kidding. And maybe it's Tom with his bro. Okay, now these are pictures of the individual keyboards that are played with the hands. You'll notice little circles under each set of keys, or each manual, each keyboard. It's hard to see now, but the ones on the left are numbered 1 through 12, and then the ones in the middle are numbered 1 through 6. Okay, and then I'll talk more to those in a little bit. The rectangular-looking ones on the top are called couplers. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Basically, that allows any sound from any keyboard to be relocated to another keyboard to beef up the sound at different pitches, high and low. The next few photos are pictures of the actual draw knobs. So it's hard to tell, but the circles with words and numbers that are in red are all the reed stops, so trumpets, oboes, and things like that. And then the ones in black are a mix of sort of like your foundational stops, what you hear when we sing hymns, and mixtures, which have fractions next to them. And then the little blue screens above those remind the organist of what division they're playing or what part of the organ the sound is coming from. Okay. These pictures, if you can see, they're numbered, these little red circle, or black circles rather, are numbered 1 through 12. Those, they're called toe studs, and those 1 through 12 correspond with the 1 through 12 little circles under the keyboards that function the same way. So if your hands are busy, then you press 1 through 12 with your feet, or if your feet are busy, you can press 1 through 12 with your hands or fingers. And then these are different ones. The ones on the top left, correspond with those rectangular ones above the keyboards you saw a moment ago. Okay? And then some of these on the bottom are shortcuts to the pedal division. So instead of pulling out pedal stops, you can just press a button and they'll come out on their own. Okay? These are called the toe pedals, which control the volume of the organ. So the one on the far left controls the volume for the choir division, which is all the sound that comes from the choir transept to our left. Okay? And the solo division, which is a new division the previous our old organ did not have, which is actually, depending on the sound, comes from different parts of the room, which we'll demonstrate later on during the hymn sing. Included in the solo division, there's a nice tuba muralibis, which we did hear this morning, which sounds from over there in the choir. We also heard a French horn this morning, and that sounds from back behind the altar. The middle pedal is the swell pedal, which controls the volume of everything that comes out, the sound that comes from behind the altar. And then the one on the right is the crescendo pedal, which basically controls the volume of the entire organ. So if that is closed and you want to make it open all the way, it goes pretty much the full organ without pressing any button. Okay, now these are sort of computer-generated images based on the architectural drawings we saw a few minutes ago. Oh, that's pretty correct. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
These are the sort of rough sketches that led to the architectural drawings. The architectural drawings are far more detailed and have measurements and a lot of information that this doesn't have.
David's being nice, and he's telling me that I have things out of order on the slideshow. Now, these are the renderings. James Hanrahan, what's keystone mean? Oh, there we go. It's gone. Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or that you want to ask me or David about what we've seen so far? Please feel free to ask. Former Senior Warden Ann Sessions has a question. I'm going to hand her the microphone so those at home can hear her.
Do the decisions on how many keyboards you have or how many pedals you have, was that determined by budget? Was that determined by size of building? Was that determined by the music we sing?
Good question. So basically, this isn't that much bigger than our old organ. Our old organs had the same size pedal board, same size keyboard, same number of keyboards, same number of manuals, 3 manuals. The only difference is we have an extra division, a solo division, which can be played from any keyboard, depending on what I'm doing or what the organist is doing. So instead of paying more money to have a 4th keyboard, which is really not necessary, we have what we call a floating division, which can be played on any keyboard. All right? Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh. So the console itself was built. You want to talk about that?
So in this case, we engaged a company from the United Kingdom called Renatus, that is a well-known company for making beautiful casework in Europe. And the architectural drawings were done by an architect that we've come to know on the island of Malta, interestingly enough. So we sent him pictures of the room, all of the little details of the woodwork in the room. He did all of the architectural drawings, then did the 3D renderings, the color renderings that we saw. Those were given to Colin Peacock, who's the president of Renatus over in the UK, and they built the wooden shell to do that. And then that was all shipped over in a gigantic crate. And then all of the work basically of wiring all of the electronics and bringing the console to life was done in our shop up in Needham. So it's kind of a group effort.
Yeah, and they did a fantastic job. I mean, the shell of the I mean, the whole thing is amazing, but particularly the shell of the console, like, you know, part of the whole deal was, and I mentioned this last night, was the goals were twofold. You know, we wanted to have something that was pleasing to hear, but also something that, you know, is easy on the eye and a pleasure to actually look at visually. So really tying in specific details that were pre-existing in the space, the communion rail carvings, the pulpit. You'll see all that stuff on the console and also the bench of the organ bench as well. And they just did an awesome job, really. And you'll see, we'll view a few videos from their shop in the UK, different parts of their whole part of this process. Jennifer, you had a question.
One really mundane question, but the extra pedal, is that that gives you the instead of the fourth manual, you said? Is that, I just wonder if, is that like, you said we didn't have it in the old organ, is this like new technology or it's just a new way of doing it? And the second question is really mundane. I just want to know, is the bench attached or adjustable? How does that work?
I'll answer the second question first. She asked if the bench was attached. No, it's not. The bench, it's a heavy bench, but it's movable. It's not attached to the pedal board or the console itself. The first question she asked was this extra division or extra set of sounds that is called the solo division, made up of solo instruments, a cello, a tuba, another cello, flute, French horn, English horn. Those are sounds the old organ didn't have. And a lot of the organ repertoire and a lot of the choral music we do call for those sounds that we didn't previously have. And if we kind of had to manufacture it doing other things, which then caused other parts of what we would do as an organist to suffer a little bit. It's kind of like overcompensate for what was lacking with the instrument. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Good questions. One more? How much does it weigh? It weighs, how much does it weigh? 500 pounds? You said, David? 500 pounds?
Console, it's probably more like 700.
Okay. So I'm glad you asked that because I neglected to mention the gentleman who helped move it into the church on Sunday night. Are they here? Please stand up. David, Paul, myself, David. Who else was here? Chris Prender, Alden Gross. So it was, you know, it was a team effort to get it off of the truck and into the room, and then once it was in the room, it nicely glided over. It's much easier to move than the old console, that's for sure. Good question, Mr. Torrance. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Is it on wheels now, so it's easy to shift?
Yes, it's on wheels. Yeah. So I can move it by myself if I have to. It's not. Yeah. It's very. Yeah. Good. All right. Now we'll view a few photos from the actual construction of the console. Just so you have an idea of what really goes into what you see. So there are those wheels, Betsy, which you can't see. Oop. Somebody just asked what the wood was. Is it oak? Yes, it is. It's English oak, right, David? English oak. And the interior is mahogany. So the exterior of the console is oak, and the interior is mahogany. You guys are probably wondering, what is this? So this is, if you look at the organ under the music stand, between the music rack and the keyboards, that horizontal row of tabs. So what we're seeing is what it looks like as a finished product. This is what it looks like from the beginning, before the actual labels get put on them and the wires get hooked up to them. So that's sort of step two, where the backing's put on, and then the actual tabs themselves with the labels of what they do and where they go are added to them. And they have a CNC machine in their shop which did all of the cutting for all this stuff. Really quite amazing. Now imagine the console on its back. This is the face of the knee board, which is here. It's all this, between the pedal board and the underneath there, being fastened together. This is what it looks like underneath the pedal board. Right, just the black notes. That was just the black notes. There are the rest. Pop quiz. What are the black notes called? The black notes on a keyboard. You can't answer. You know the answer. There you go. Thank you. That's right. So in the renderings that we saw earlier, somebody with a keen eye may have noticed that they were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then above that 7, 8, 9, and 10. A very specific organist asked to have those flip-flopped. Those are the foot toe studs that match the same ones in the manuals. And so, I'll just go back to that real quick. So this box with this hole in the center here is where the foot pedals sit to control the volume for the choir and solo division, the swell and the crescendo. They haven't been put in yet. Here are the manuals. And then a neat little hidden feature, which I know Paul Shirky loves, is the retractable drawer to hide all things, to ensure that the music director keeps a tidy console, which he does anyway. This is a picture of the light, the music rack light. A nice little feature that was, I didn't know about originally. It's actually on a dimmer switch, so I can control how bright or how not bright the lighting is while sitting at the console. And this is pretty much how the instrument left in the big crate from England and shipped to Boston, the way you see it right now. Okay, now, some people are itching to ask questions, so we'll pause and questions, ask away. What are the keys made of?
The keys are made of of boxwood, and on top of them is bleached, polished cow bone for the natural. So all of the white parts that you see are actually cow bone. And then the sharps are made of African ebony.
A huge difference to play keyboards like that as opposed to the plastic ones that we had on the old console. My colleague over here referred to them as Casio keyboard keys. But I will say the keyboards we have that the band uses and are weighted, and they're much better than actually the keyboards that the old console had. So I'm not dissing Casio. I have a Casio keyboard at home too. So it's such a huge difference, and I know David would agree that having an instrument that's satisfying to play is half the deal. And some little detail, the simplest little detail, like the actual action of playing a scale or playing a chord is a huge difference now compared to what it was previously. Any other questions from those shop photos? Yes, Tug Nor.
I'm a graduate of, what was her name? Mrs. Blanding's dance class that my mother made me go to.
Ballroom dancing?
Ballroom dancing. And I was sitting here, and I'm not sure this was about a week ago. You were playing some wild songs, good dance songs, jitterbug songs. And sitting over here,
Dixieland Sunday.
Dixieland Sunday. I almost got up during that and asked Allison, who joined me like she did at a function that was held for this gentleman here, and we did a jitterbug together. And I almost went and grabbed her up and started to do a jitterbug in front of the group that was gathered. Would something like that be possible?
Right now?
you being the music director and playing some different music or some dance music, would it be possible to do, where's our minister?
It's up to the boss.
Somebody that just felt in the mood to go up and dance with this new instrument.
I wasn't ready for that question. Well done. It sounds like something, a private affair, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. All right. Well, we'll check with the boss. It's up to the boss. All right. So that was 20 years ago. Any other questions? Yes, Grant Harmon.
When I purchase a house or a car, I always finance it. And when I do that, I have to make a down payment, and then I make payments to the bank every so often. How is the financing arranged for this instrument?
There is none. It's all paid for. All right. Thanks to you all. Thanks to you all. We're pretty much, we're good in that department. So thank you for asking. I'm sure some people probably were wondering. Dan.
Yeah, now that we have this beautiful instrument, and it is beautiful both in sound and appearance, what's it going to take to keep it in really good condition?
Tender love and care. Prayers. Good question. Proper usage, proper maintenance, everything you would do, oil changes and all that stuff. Well, we're asking questions that don't quite have to do with where we are in the slideshow. We'll get to those later. Does anybody have any more questions? But remember that question, Kathy. I'll come back. And I'll let David speak to that a little bit too. That's a good question because I know some people were asking. Any more questions on the shop photos from the UK that we saw? Yeah.
Does Opus 17 refer to this particular unique piece that's right here, or is that a model?
I can let David answer this if I don't articulate it clearly enough, but Opus 17 is the 17th instrument that this company has built completely custom for a specific client. Is that about right? Yeah. So 17 in a line of more than 17. And the first Opus 1, everyone knows, was installed at Trinity Church, Wall Street, back after 9/11. And what was a temporary instrument ended up being a much longer than a temporary instrument up only until a few years ago when Trinity Wall Street did a huge multi-million-dollar renovation, which included 2 new pipe organs. And now what was at Trinity Wall Street, Opus 1, is now in 2 different locations, right? One half of it's in, because there was two consoles, 2 organs. One's at a church in Boston and the other one's at a big church in Manhattan. So good question. Any other questions from the shop photos? Okay, good. We'll move right along. So this is a picture that was drawn by Ted Ruig. I want to say, I forget when this was drawn. Sometime after the first organ committee meeting, where we kind of decided, the old organ had, a handful of speakers up on the wall on either side of the window. We remember those, right? And then 2 little ones over here that we never used because they sounded so bad. And so, as part of the conversation with our consultant, Tom Sheehan, the proverbial wisdom was that instead of having a narrow, unsupportive sound for the congregation and the choir, we wanted to try to achieve, if possible, a more broader sound that covered more of the room more equally, so that instead of being up at the front and it's really loud, and in the back not quite so loud, we kind of achieved more of a balance by having the sound spread out across the room with more sound coming out of less speakers, if that makes sense. Okay. So this was Ted's chicken scratch drawing at the very beginning. Pretty good, huh? Ted, if you're listening, thank you. And then this is actually my chicken scratch drawing based on what Ted did. Where I posed the question, can we conceal the speakers, unlike previously where they weren't? They were just out in view of everything. And then this is where John Kemp came into the fold. So this is one of John's early sketches of the choir transept of a speaker shelf. And then it's a little tricky to see, but you'll notice that in comparison to the previous picture, you can kind of see sort of like the facade of the casework over top of the shelf that we saw in the previous picture. Now I'll let John speak to a little bit of this. One of the, it wasn't a concern, but, well, maybe it was. It was a concern for John, but I was like, we'll be fine. In order for initially I thought that we were going to actually lay the speakers horizontally. So that way we knew we could have them, up on the wall in a case and not have to worry about anybody hitting their head, given the height of the speakers themselves. Thankfully, there was enough room, and the wall could support to have the speakers off far enough away from the wall to have them vertically standing and be able to whether you're getting down from the pulpit or leaving the sacristy, to come down those steps without having to worry about hitting your head. Is that about right, John? Yep. Do you want to speak to any of that?
Well, let's see. My concern was on this side in particular, coming down, because those stairs are used. Coming down underneath there, if there's a 45 angle bracket or a square bracket, it comes down to about this far. So that was the determining factor to do an arched bracket. Because if I stand up there, I'm walking down here, what if this came out square? I'm a short guy.
So is our record.
Yeah. So somebody's 6'6" or 6'8" would walk through and it would be right there. So, I mean, it might be good, but the idea was to give plenty of room and plenty of strength, because at that point, we were not sure how much the speakers were going to weigh, and the important factor is to be able to carry that with no danger, and be able to support somebody, for instance, having to crawl up on there and repair or replace or do wiring.
The arch brackets ended up to be really functional, but look good too. Come on. Now this is just a picture of John's thoughts about the screens and enclosing the cases to conceal the speakers in a way that didn't affect the sound coming out at all, but that looked tasteful and looked appropriate for the space. And then on the left and the top, you can see John designed tracks. So all these doors open and close sideways on tracks if we need to get in there for whatever reason. Same thing on the other side. A little fuzzy, but this is sort of the measured out drawing to scale, right, John? To make sure that the chicken scratch would work, essentially. Do you want to speak to any of this?
The little hatch lines that you see on the lower side of the drawing, those are actually the studs or cleats that are on the wall. That wall over there is a concrete block wall with 2x on the face. Very strong. Over here, this is a stud wall with 2x6s. Both of them have sheetrock on them, so this has to anchor, everything has to anchor directly into the structure, so it's got plenty of strength. This one's easy enough. It goes onto the studs. This one here had to go through the cleats and all the way into the block wall, so we had to use different anchoring systems slightly.
Yeah. For those of you who were around when the church was renovated back in the mid-'80s, you may remember that to the left of this door used to be a hallway, and so the wall was obviously completely different than the wall over here. So that provided, it gave a few challenges, but our genius was able to get around those. And also the fact that it doesn't look like it to the naked eye, but the lengths of both transepts are different lengths. This one's actually a little longer than this one. Is that right? No, it's the other way around. This one's a little longer. The south transept's a little longer than the north transept. So the cases aren't the same size. One's a little, right? They're a little off. They don't look like it, but they are. This is just a picture that shows the space between where the screens go to, and then the space up into the ceiling, which we decided to keep open, and then John put crown molding at the top to finish it off. All right, any questions on any of the things you saw there for me or John?
What's the total weight of the bank of speakers and the...
So each speaker weighs what, David? 45 pounds? 50 pounds. Let's call it 50 pounds. Okay, so each speaker is 60 pounds, and there's 10 speakers in each case. So that's 600 pounds.
And then the casework itself?
John, do you know the weight of the casework itself? It ain't moving. If it could, I could stand up there and it wasn't going to fall down. So we're not worried. Any other questions? No? That'll be a question for John. The question was the color of the stain of the wood, which John and I had several conversations about.
We talked about this a lot. The very first visit here, I came in and it was in the morning. There was a huge amount of light coming in from the east window. The reredos itself is fairly dark. It's got walnut as the maroon color to it, and the glare made it difficult to see. I don't want to call it theatrics, but the going on of the service itself. Everything was backlit so strongly, and so that we talked about keeping things light. Well, keeping things light didn't seem to be appropriate. So we looked at the colors that are used on the pews. We looked at the colors that are on the floor, which are lighter than the reredos, but still within the same tone. And that's what we tried to do here. In fact, what's happened is that I was concerned if we stained them dark that they were going to look ominous in the front. Well, that's in fact not what happened. In fact, they support the front to the point that the whole thing becomes a nice supportive whole.
Yeah, if you look really carefully, it's getting dark now, but come into the building someday and just take a look at the different colors of stain in the room. If you really look, there's probably like 10 different stain colors, or maybe 3 or 4, but over time some of them have faded. So how do we kind of tie it all together without it appearing to be need to be visually appealing, to get it to look not too overbearing and to fit in with the rest of the color and the stain in the space. Any other questions? Good question. Yes? That's a question for our Director of Operations. We have all kidding aside, no, we have a portable scaffold which can easily wheel in and is tall enough to be able to get in there into Swiffer or dust whenever we need to. Okay, now on to some of the photos of the casework construction itself from John's shop and then here in the sanctuary. This was about this time last year, right, John? I remember coming to your shop over the Thanksgiving break. So those are the frames of the screens. And those are what are those called, John? Those are the slats of the screens. And there they are, all stained. And there are the tracks or rails that the screens slide back and forth on. So this was this was after the new year, this year, shortly after, during Epiphany time. Oh, where'd that come from? That's my son. What is he doing? He came in one day, and he was 5 at this point. Obviously keen on what's going on, and what's Daddy being busy with all day. He was making sure that John's measurements were correct, I think, and I think they were. Yep, we hadn't taken that down yet. Yeah, but so there we are. All I needed to put his stamp of approval on everything, of course. And there we go. And this was the day that M&O delivered all the hardware and all the speakers and everything, and we had the Wiseman Electric in for a couple days of install. The rack you see on the chancel step, that is behind the altar wall, which runs everything, amps, the computer itself. And one of the nice things about this instrument is that you don't know it's there. You don't hear it running. It's super, super quiet. What were you talking about here, John? Do you remember? Your in-depth conversation with one of the electricians. What was it about the lights? Gotcha. Right. Okay. Yeah. Kind of, it wasn't an afterthought, but I had said, can we put some lights on in the bottom of the case so that we could have more light for the choir, which I think the choir appreciates. Right. It was afterwards, or I know it was one oversight. I have to confess, and it was the lights were put in after the fact, also on a dimmer. So this is the speakers behind this is the platform that Paul Shirky built. One of the things we had, obviously wasn't a concern, but behind the altar, as we have in the aisles, on the side aisles, HVAC vents, and behind the altar there are a bunch of them, just like the ones in the aisles. So we had to construct something that wouldn't prohibit airflow behind the altar. And I would definitely go back and take a look, and if you haven't seen it already, the platform, which it's really strong, and Paul did a wonderful job on that. He could have used more fasteners, you said. No. So you remember the first Sunday, I think it was the last Sunday of Epiphany, was when we first had all the new equipment for the new organ hooked up to the old console. And you remember for some time we had the speakers kind of just sitting there before the screens went in. So you'll notice, that's about the space from the base of the shelf itself to the top edge of the ceiling is roughly 55 inches or so. So they fit perfectly. That wasn't an accident. That was done. This was carefully measured out. And then this is the action of the screens going in with the frames, and then the screen doors themselves after the fact. And there are the lights. So any questions for me or John about all of the wizardry that he did for us over these last year plus? Ask him. He's here now. He'll better answer all that than I could. Yes. The question is, how many speakers total? 30. 32. Sorry. 10, 10, and 12. So 10 in each transept and 12, 10 behind the altar, and then 2 subwoofers in each corner.
Are those custom
you want to answer this one?
The speakers were originally made by a pretty well-known audiophile company called Polk Audio, and we modify some of the circuit boards inside the speakers to do more specific jobs for organ tone. But they're basically Polk Model ES60 speakers with some modifications to the circuitry.
Somebody asked me that question yesterday, and I said, you could actually buy them online, but I know that they've been tinkered with depending on the instrument that they're being installed with. But I didn't quite know why, so thank you for better articulating that than I could. Good question. Ernie.
My question is sort of with that, is there sort of a preamp or amp system within the organ? And I don't want to get into proprietary secrets or anything, but it's, I just wondered about that too.
David? So the amps in the rack, I think he's alluding to?
Yeah, if you go up and take a look at the equipment rack on the left side behind the Reredos here, you'll see that there are 4 8-channel audio power amplifiers made by Crown. So they're Crown CT8150s. They're 150 watts apiece, times 8 channels, times 32. So a lot of power there.
And fantastic audio, as we've all heard, and we'll hear in a little bit. Any other you had a question, John? Oh, you asked your question about the number. Yeah. Kristen.
I just wanted to point out one part that you didn't mention, which is that Jim personally painted behind the speakers a charcoal color so they would blend into the background, which was, I thought, pretty ingenious.
Yeah, so instead of, so if you walk in for the first time, you probably wouldn't know that there are speakers in those cases. Tried to find a color that wasn't too dark or too light, but somewhat matched the color of the speakers, which is kind of charcoal-y, and just painted the wall behind them to better conceal them. So, thank you. Other duties is assigned, we call that. So, any other questions? Yeah.
What are the specs on the subwoofers?
Subwoofer specs. Dave?
I'm not exactly sure what specs you're interested in. They're custom-made enclosures for us by a company in Highland, Illinois, and they use sort of some high-grade 18-inch subwoofer drivers, and they're capable of being driven by up to, I think, 3,000 watts if necessary. And our measurements are that they're basically within 1 dB down to 15 hertz. So they go low. They go really low, and they're about the most neutral sounding subwoofer cabinets I've ever heard. They contribute no overtones to the sound.
Good question. Thanks, Gary. Welcome, Gary, my colleague from the Eastern Shore, Christchurch, Kent Island. Any other questions? And then we'll just 2 or 3 more little photos of the final bit, and then we're going to, yeah.
I just want to make a comment to John. If you put it try, I think the case work is.
Yeah. Thank you. I didn't pay him to say that. Okay, one more question, and then we're going to move on. Yeah, so that stain color actually, there's a pew that's no longer being used in the robing room where I took the pencil holder, actually, and that was the sample of the color for the exterior. Yeah, good question, architect. All right, very good. A few more, 2 or 3 more, just sort of like the last, everything's in, we're here. Maybe a photo of the gents unloading the truck too. And this was just Sunday night. Yes. I wanted to make sure I took a photo of before, still on the truck, after in the church. So. And then this was taken earlier in the week, maybe Monday morning. Doug, who's not here today, the mastermind behind all the voicing and really the technology into every single stop, every single sound, tweaked and customized for this space specifically. Those of you who are familiar with organ building, organ voicing is a very tedious process that it's really kind of, it could go on forever if you really think about it, depending on, so when I'm not here in 20 years and the next organist comes in and says, I want this to be louder, I want this to be softer, then that could happen. It's sort of like the only constant is change sort of mentality. Yeah, Dave.
There's a saying in organ building that an organ is never finished, it's just finally abandoned.
Yes. Oh, we won't be abandoning this anytime soon. So. And that's pretty much it. And then that's from a couple nights ago. And that's it. So any final questions on anything? Yeah, before we move on. Yeah, Betsy, real quick.
How many sets of memory are there, and is there a programmable crescendo pedal?
So there are how many memory levels? More than I need. Okay, 1,000. Yeah, whereas I had like 10 previously. So, yeah, 4. You're right. Yeah, so needless to say, there's a lot of time that goes into registering what you hear on a Sunday morning, hours, frankly. And it'll be nice to not have to constantly redo that over and over again every week, depending on what the choir's singing or what the hymns are, what season we're in. And having an instrument that's flexible and able to, I could put in all the work and then the computer does the rest. And so more button pushing and less stop pulling. Yeah, Izzy.
Do you have an operator's license? And how many lessons have you had?
I think all told, I've maybe had, other than this morning and the Veterans Day service Friday, maybe 2 hours on the instrument. So, yeah. So, but yeah, our sacred music interns had more time on the organ. Paul.
At some point, we discussed what kind of, where the sounds of the organ was sampled from, and is this organ particularly French or German, or is it everything?
I can let David answer this as far as he'll be willing to, but I will say every stop on this instrument is sampled from basically a well-known instrument somewhere. And in some cases, 2 different instruments on one sound, depending on what it is, which is totally unique. Am I allowed to say that? Okay. But I can let David answer that real quick if there's anything else you want to add.
So our approach to recording pipe organ sounds for these instruments is such that we tend primarily to obtain them from American pipe organs. One of the reasons is that my partner and I are particularly fond of the American organ sound. So there are no European sounds in this instrument. Everyone was taken from an American organ from the 20th or the very late 19th century. There are probably 50 different pipe organs that are represented in the sounds of this instrument. The way that we ascribe which sounds are going to be used is once the instrument is on site and is running and we can actually listen to it, my partner Doug, who does the majority of all of the voicing work, he'll pull out a given stop and listen to it in the space, decide if that's an appropriate sound, and then, if not, cycle through our library of hundreds or thousands of different sounds until the right one kind of pops up. And so it's really all done by ear. And so there is no formula to it other than just building it in the room, stop by stop, chorus by chorus, over a period of time.
One second, I'll just want to add to that. I mean, in my head, I kind of thought, okay, well, I know of these 10 organs that I want this sound to come from. And maybe some of them do work in here, but maybe, some of them don't. And it's Doug's genius and David's genius to say to the music director or the organist, that's not going to work in your space, even if you love the sound. And I grew up singing in New York City as a boy, and it has one of the most famous chamades in existence. But that particular sound, that particular brassy trumpet sound, may not work in a space like St. Margaret's or wherever. So, Mary, real quick.
David, how would you characterize the sound of an American organ as opposed to?
I don't know if I can really answer that question this afternoon. Yeah.
We'll have another forum on that one.
It's one of those questions that's easy to ask and very hard to answer. American organ builders, of course, who originally emigrated here from Europe, were very much affected by the culture of the nation. And, so whereas, and the language also. So whereas French pipe organs, the famous French organs, tend to have a more nasal sound, like the language, frankly. And the Italian pipe organs tend to have a very lyrical sound, and the Germans tend to have a kind of a lot of that sound in the pipe organs. It's all very much so. So the American organs really is its own unique sound. It's a blended sound with attributes from all of those tonal families, and it's. I personally find that it was the first achievement in the early 20th century, what we call the American classic organ design, that can play all forms of music respectively. Meaning you can play anything written by anybody at any time, and it can sound wonderful. It's a sound that allows you a great deal of flexibility. So I don't know if that helps, but
that's a brilliant answer. I hope everybody just took notes on that. That's a way better answer than I would have given. Thank you. But he's right, though. Another thing, a point of emphasis on this project was, I'm not going to get into the background of it, but I felt as a place where we're promoting music education and worship and the worship we offer and the variety in which we offer our worship and what we do on any given Sunday. We have a lot. It's vibrant. It's diverse. And with that, we need an instrument that fits into that overall diversity, sort of like that, that other cog in the wheel that we didn't previously have, that can play all of the organ repertoire, not just Bach, not just Buxtehude, but not a French organ that just all that sounds good on it is Vierne or Franck. So like we heard, Deborah played Bach this morning, but next week, well, the band's playing next week, so I don't know what the prelude or postlude is, but it's important to be able to have an instrument that can play the entire repertoire that is appropriate for somebody to learn on, and not just us to come and listen to or for me to play every week. I think that's an important thing that we're also trying to do here. Great. All right. Does everybody have you had a question earlier.
General maintenance. Like I have my piano tuned every year. What
So no maintenance really right now, but periodically, M&O will come through, and if I feel like something needs to be tweaked or something unforeseen maybe happened, then it'll be addressed. Maintenance. Yeah, and a lot of the maintenance could be done remotely, which is another reason why we went with Marshall and Ogletree. One of the neat things about this instrument is There's a secondary palette of sounds that aren't controlled by the draw knobs, but they're hidden, if you will. And if the light bulb goes off on a Sunday morning, and I decide I want to have a timpani stop like the Naval Academy Chapel, I could text David and he'll upload it, or his crew will upload it on the organ, so that way by the end of the service I have it. You know, I don't know if I'll be texting during church, but yeah, I could. But in all seriousness, yeah, no, I mean, this is an investment that we're making, and you know, diligent maintenance will happen as it needs to happen. So, good question. Yeah, and we're going to play it for 7:30. 7:30 service, Kathy. Last question. Oh, 2 more questions, and then we're going to.
This question is actually for David. Now that it's in the space and you've heard it play, what do you think?
I think it's fantastic. He said he thinks it's fantastic. Well, right. Very funny. But really, I mean, we could, to David's point, it sounds fantastic. You know, all around, the project came to be what it was, and it was a successful project. But what matters is what you all think and how you think it sounds. And I sure hope that it's a significant upgrade over what we previously had in all ways. So, okay, Barbara Marta, the last question.
Clear and concise explanation of how each stop was acoustically suited to this space. If there were to be some somewhat major renovation of the room, could that then be altered, or would it carry forward?
Absolutely. So let's say for some reason, I don't know. Right. So part of the deal with having a digital organ is that we wouldn't have that problem. And if the room was expanded, or we had more people in the pews on a Sunday morning, you know, or we need to make something louder or softer, that can all be done very easily. Yeah, a recalibrate. Yeah, that's a good term. Good question. Does everybody have a program with hymns in it? No. Can we get some programs? Oh, yeah. We have a whole book. No, I'm sorry. Booklets of, and I'll talk about the hymns that are in these booklets as we progress through our hymn sing, which we're going to begin in a moment. You up here? Good. And thank you all for helping with that. And we're gonna put the lights back on, and then I'm gonna have an important question to ask all of you. James, could we turn off the? Or do you want to keep the picture up? You want to keep the picture up? No. Okay, that's fine. So you're right. So my important question is, how many of you went to church this morning? Everybody. Well done. So the next question, I already know the answer. So everybody has sung and is nicely warmed up. So we don't need to do a warm-up before we start singing. Very good. All right, so while James is finishing that, I have a few remarks I just want to touch on before we start singing. I thought I'd just sort of give you a peek into sort of my head and the way I think and kind of how I operate a little bit. I think some may be wondering why we're about to jump into a good old hymn sing, as opposed to having a brilliant organist like Grace come and give a recital like we heard Tom play last night. And I mean, the easy answer is, oh, well, Tom's an impossible act to follow because he's a brilliant musician. But it's more than just that. Throughout the Christian tradition, the importance of music and singing cannot be understated. Why do we sing? Why are we able to sing? Whether we think we can or not. We all have a voice that God gave us, and if you think you can't sing, you can. I think we're supposed to sing because the Bible tells us to do that, and because God gifted us with our voices. What better way to give thanks for that and to give thanks to God for using our voices to sing? The act of singing and the act of playing instruments are found throughout Scripture, often highlighting major moments in the story of God's relationship with his people. Just to name a few instances, Moses and Miriam singing to the Lord as the Israelites flee through the Red Sea out of slavery into Egypt. The angel singing to the shepherds at Jesus' birth. Paul writing to the Corinthians that the resurrection will be heralded by the sounding of a trumpet. Countless psalms, like Psalm 96, Cantate Domino, O sing unto the Lord a new song. In the context of liturgy, which I think Patty mentioned this in her sermon this morning, the liturgy, also known as the work of the people, that's what liturgy is, right? And worship, which I call the worth-ship of God. Singing can be deeply formative. Psalm 150, which we read aloud this morning, provides the perfect juxtaposition of worship and music and singing. Many years ago at Westminster Choir College, I had the good fortune of taking a hymnody and psalmody course with renowned musicologist Robin Lever, one of the world's great authorities on the music of Bach and Martin Luther. He had a unique definition for what a hymn is. Most of us would probably define a hymn as a song that praises God, right? But he had a different definition, and it's always stuck with me, all these years later. He defined a hymn or hymns as theology encapsulated. Think about that for a moment. The hymnal, the hymns, regardless of denomination, theology encapsulated. And I just say, how true is that? Completely true. As I was thinking about what I was going to say today, and beginning to put my thoughts down to paper, was the same day that Jim Litton died. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention his recent passing, whose funeral was in Princeton yesterday, and John and his wife Mary were there. For those of you whose name that may not be familiar, to say that Dr. Litton was a giant in American church music would be an understatement. Known for his 10 years as music director at St. Bartholomew's, Park Avenue, New York City, Christ Church Cathedral, Indianapolis, Trinity Church, Princeton, and as conductor of the renowned American Boy Choir. As head of the Sacred Music Department at Westminster Choir College and music director at Princeton Theological Seminary, he taught hundreds of organists, church musicians, and seminarians who now serve schools and churches throughout the country. He was also a visiting professor at VTS here in Alexandria and at Sewanee, University of the South. And some may not know this, but in retirement, he accepted the call to serve as choir master at the National Cathedral for 2 years. Not quite the place I want to work, having just retired. But that's who Jim Litton was. I mean, somebody like him could do that, and he did that. As a member and vice chairman of the Episcopal Church's Standing Commission on Church Music, he participated in the preparation and publication of our 1982 hymnal. He was also editor of the Plain Song Psalter for our Episcopal Church, and both our 1982 hymnal and the Psalter are used every day all around the country in the Episcopal Church. I thought it was appropriate to include the hymn in our packet, Go Forth for God, which we'll sing in a little while. My colleague TJ will play. The tune was written by another Westminster professor named Reverend Dr. Eric Routley, who wrote the tune in honor of Dr. Litton. And the hymn tune in the hymnal is called Litton, named after Jim. Some long time, maybe Mike, the Winds and the Norse for sure. Longtime parishioners here at St. Margaret's may remember Reverend Jerry Ash, who was a former associate rector here many years ago. He passed away last year, And actually, at his funeral was the funeral where our old organ crapped out. Yeah. But I didn't get to meet him, and I wish I had. I was surprised to discover that he and I shared the same experience of growing up as a treble chorister in New York City. Father Ash, decades earlier at St. John the Divine, under legendary choir master Alec Whiten, and me at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue under Jerry Hancock. We're sort of a small little fraternity. You were mentioning fraternity earlier, Tug. Us old choir boys we're a little fraternity, no matter whether in the UK or in America. And we all have similar stories that we share, no matter where we were when we were younger. Dr. Whiten, who was at Big John, as we call it, in New York, was famous for saying that all church musicians wear 3 hats, or serve in 3 roles. First, as pastor. Second, as teacher. And third, and finally last, as performer. So in that order: pastor, teacher, performer. Some of you may know Bill Roberts, who was recently retired as church music professor at VTS. He wrote a book called Music in Vital Congregations, which I have in my bookshelf. I think Peter has it too. And in his book, he expands on what Dr. Whiten, his quote is famous for him saying, that church musicians play a significant role in creating spiritual community among their parishioners. The question posed to us as church musicians, and clergy too, is what could be more important than leading worship and inspiring others to do the same, or building community through singing? And we all were obviously deprived of that for some time during the pandemic. And some of us maybe didn't quite realize it until we were finally able to come back and sing in church, and how much, we didn't realize we missed it until we couldn't do it. Other than our human voice, the best vehicle in which to facilitate all of this is through the playing of the organ. As the organ committee conveyed at the outset of this project, a fine instrument in capable hands adds a splendor to worship and can powerfully lift us spiritually, sometimes when we don't even realize it. The organ uniquely possesses the capacity to support the corporate singing of any size gathering, while giving resonance to the breadth of human emotions, from joy to sadness, from praise to lamentation. With our new sanctuary organ, Opus 17 by Marshall Ogletree, we have an instrument that will further enhance our liturgies and our other musical offerings, while ably serving as a vehicle to draw people to us as we continue to strive to musically lead, inspire, and transform through worship, education, and performance. I will introduce our organists who are going to share the bench with me as we go. So I'm done talking. Why don't we stand and we'll do some singing? So let's open our booklet to the opening hymn. Question was asked, are we going to sing all of the verses? Those who know me well know the answer to that. Yes. Sounds good. Take a seat for a moment. I'd like to invite my colleague from First Presbyterian Church here in Annapolis, Grace O, to the console. Welcome, Grace. I'll let her tell her story of her travels abroad throughout her career. But we're lucky, I know my fellow Annapolis AGO chapter mates will agree, she's been a wonderful colleague to join the fold here in Annapolis. A little side note, another connection to Princeton. Grace did grad work in organ performance at the Choir College with Ken Cowan, who's now at Rice University. So another Princeton connection here in Annapolis. And I'm going to turn it over to Grace, who's going to lead us to the next few hymns. Thank you. Stand if you want, or stay seated, whatever you prefer. Please be seated. Thank you, Grace. Wonderful. I almost forgot to mention why the hymns are in the program that we're singing today. It's a rather tricky prospect to program a hymn sing. So I thought I'd sort of share with you how all the hymns in this booklet came to be. Sort of, the 5 rules, if you will, of thumb. Hymns that everybody knows. Hymns that are favorites of the leadership around here. So Peter was joking about St. Patrick's breastplate. Those of you know the wonderful Trinity hymn with 50 verses, 7 verses, with a fun verse 6. So I kind of said, we're not going to do that one, but he has another favorite hymn that comes around Christmas time, Angels from the Realms of Glory. So that's coming up shortly. The first 2 hymns, obviously, had the themes of music and singing and instruments. So that was sort of like the thought behind those first 2 hymns. Hymns that quote the Psalter, where music is, prominently sung or spoken. And then these the next 3 that Grace just played, I kind of asked her, what are your favorite hymns? And she gave me a few of them, and I said, let's do them. And so that was why we just sang those 3. Next, I'm going to invite David Ogletree up to the console, and he's going to play a few hymns as we get into the liturgical seasons of Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. Also wanted to try to incorporate the liturgical seasons in the hymn sing. So we'll have one from every season, Advent through Pentecost. Going back to the whole definition of a hymn as theology encapsulated, the quintessential hymn in that mindset is Lo, He Comes with Clouds Descending, in my opinion. Great hymn. I wish it wasn't so associated with Advent. So it's one of my favorite hymns. So David will play that momentarily. And then Regent Square, Angels from the Realms of Glory, one of Peter's favorites. And then David picked the third hymn, Jesus Lives Thy Terrors Now, which we sing at Easter time. All right, so when David's ready, we'll take it away. Feel free to stand or sit. Thank you. Please be seated. I'll now invite my colleague, T.J. Thomas, to the console. TJ is a longtime friend who's minister of music at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lewis, Delaware. He's kind enough to be here in the middle of his sabbatical. So thank you. I'll owe him later. Up next, I alluded to the liturgical seasons, and now we're up to Pentecost, Come Down, O Love Divine. Tune, Down Ampany, the town in which Ralph Vaughan Williams was born. I think it was October 12th, just a month ago, would have been Vaughan Williams' 150th birthday. So October was a big month of places doing a lot of Vaughan Williams music. So I thought it appropriate to do some Vaughan Williams. And I don't know if he's going to do it or not, but there's a golden rule for church musicians, at least that I was taught, that when playing hymns, you never reharmonize Bach, and you never reharmonize Vaughan Williams, because you don't need to. And obviously Vaughan Williams is to blame for great tunes like For All the Saints, All Creatures of Our God and King, and good tunes like that. And then up next will be Nettleton, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, which we all love. This is one of Patty's favorite hymns, so we threw that in there. And in our 1982 hymnal, it was reharmonized by my former choir master, who I mentioned earlier, Jerry Hancock. And then after that, in memory of Jim Litton, we'll sing his hymn tune, Litton, Go Forth for God. All right. Take it away, TJ. Thank you.